Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, Rabbi.
Good evening. The parsha this week coming up is Devarim. Devarim is often referred to as a review or repetition of the Torah. It is actually more than that. It's an explanation of the deeper understanding that Moses, was given into the insights of everything from creation on by Hashem. What he showed him at Sinai and what he showed him at the Midbar. One of the main messages in this parsha is do not fall into the temptations of the nations. This applies then as we were going into Eretz Israel, and it applies as much today. I must say, it applies maybe even more today than ever. All through our history, it's applied. Basically, what Moshe was telling them is to have faith in Hashem and discipline ourselves to face all the challenges in Eretz Israel. What do we have to do today? We have to discipline ourselves, have faith in Hashem to face the challenges that we face today. The same as we did when we went into Eretz Israel. Every time we had faith in Hashem properly and disciplined ourselves and did what we were supposed to do, things went forward and up. Every time we didn't, unfortunately, the opposite. I'm going to actually read to you a story that shows this struggle. In fact, I'm going to tell it to you and then I'll fill it in on the exact words. Once there was a very renowned physician. It's often happened in our history that we've had renowned physicians who've been spoken against at the court. Rambam is a perfect example. There were people against him in the time when he was in Egypt, in Saladin's court. The vizier of Saladin and the other ministers got together with him, mainly against him, mainly because he was a Jew. And sometimes they had some reasonable ministers. In this case, this story is a very similar one. This renowned physician had enemies in the government, mainly because he was a Jew. They did have some decent ministers who weren't swayed, who the king could trust. And he was so framed by them that he was put in solitary confinement. Now, solitary confinement in those days, we have written records, was so horrific. They used to chain them by their neck. They used to chain them. They should give them a little piece of bread and water, often dirty water, old bread, moldy bread, to survive.
No offense.
This particular physician was not only the king's physician, he was a very great advisor to the king. And the king used to think about him. And one day he said to a minister that he could trust, go and see how the physician's doing in jail. And report back to me. He goes down there, there's this dismal, more than dismal. I've done a dismal, maybe doesn't describe how horrific it was. Rats running around. This poor man chained up and living on this spot. People talk about diets. This wasn't a diet. This was, I don't know what words to use. So anyhow, he sees him and his actual face is glowing. And he starts asking this physician, this ex-minister, this ex-advisor of the king, who's now in jail, questions. And he's lucid, sharp as ever. The minister goes back to the king and reports, wow, your minister's in good condition. He's a little thin, but his mind and his whole demeanor is amazing. The king says, go and find out more. So the minister goes back, the one that the king can trust and knows that he wasn't in this gang that framed the physician. He goes back and he says, tell me the secret of your ability to keep yourself in this condition under such horrific conditions. He says, I'm a doctor. I prescribe 5 medicines for myself. So the minister says to him, tell me the prescription. Maybe in those courts, the minister could have got framed by a similar gang. He says, please tell me. He says, okay. And I'm going to read them to you. Although I know them, I'm going to read them to you. It's maybe better. The physician replied, the first ingredient is trust in God. The second is awareness that my own sins caused my misfortune. Therefore, why should I complain? The third, knowledge that God afflicts me for my benefit, to expiate my sins and to help me grow as a person, may I add. The fourth, I realize that even in these dismal circumstances, there are people with greater misfortunes than myself. And the fifth is one of my wife's favorites. It was the favorite saying of Aryeh Levine, Reb Aryeh Levine, the famous Rebbe of the prisoners. I know that Hashem's help can arrive in the wink of an eye, or the twinkling of an eye. The king was told the words of the wise minister, and he was released. And as I said earlier, the physician's attitude in the parable that we've just told typifies the Jewish people's approach to their long and sorrowful exile, a history whose pages are stained with more blood and tears than words can possibly describe. The secret ingredient that has carried us through all the hardships is emunah, our faith. Now, faith doesn't mean just faith. Oh, I believe. That's better than nothing, I suppose. But that's not it. Even when Habakkuk said, the famous prophet, the last thing, because different people, to keeping the 613 mitzvahs, keep the Jewish people keeping the 600 good deeds, the mitzvahs that they had to do, they cut it down to 13, 12, 11, and Habakkuk says faith alone. But it doesn't mean faith alone. He means faith in the 613 mitzvahs, faith in Hashem's Torah, faith in understanding the whole. That's because we can't, if we believe blindly, as I say, perhaps it's better than nothing, but many times blind belief can lead one to more mistakes. Rather use your natural seichel than blind belief. We don't have to believe, we know. And the essence that Moshe goes through in this parsha is exactly that. He takes them on a journey from the time that they went through Egypt. He tells them, remember the plagues in Egypt, how Hashem did them for you, how he brought you out with a strong hand, how he led you through the desert, how he led you through the sea of reeds, where it parted for you, how he led you to Sinai, where you received the Torah. And he goes through the whole thing. And he doesn't say, you must believe. He says, I showed you, I told you, you saw, you know. He doesn't say believe, because they were there. The fathers and the sons that left Egypt, and the uncles and the grandfathers and grandmothers and sisters and cousins and everybody that left Egypt, approximately 3 million people, all saw. They didn't guess, believe, maybe, perhaps. Over 3 million people were more than witnesses. They were complete, equal partners in this, participators in this incredible journey that we're still in. And what I want to say to you tonight is that we have to hook in to this understanding, that we know that our forefathers were at Sinai, we received the Torah, and we must know also that the chain that I told you about many times, from Moses to this day, from Moshe Rabbeinu to our time, we know who taught who, how to understand it and internalize it, not interpret, how to understand it and internalize it in our hearts and our minds, or our minds and our hearts, so that it affects our neshama, our soul, to such an extent that we become more uplifted people and rise to every occasion that we should be able to do so to bring Mashiach soon in our days. Thank you.
Amen. Wow. It was good, man.